On the wall Bible verse meaning and study. What did the writing on the wall mean? What does this Bible verse have to do with Christians today? The phrase the handwritings on the wall probably came from the verse in Daniel 5:5 which says immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. But what prompted this mysterious handwriting? Who was controlling the fingers? What was the message all about? To make sure of the text we should look at the context and the setting in which it was written. What did the writing on the wall mean? What does this Bible verse have to do with Christians today? The phrase the handwritings on the wall probably came from the verse in Daniel 5:5 which says immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. But what prompted this mysterious handwriting? Who was controlling the fingers? What was the message all about? To make sure of the text we should look at the context and the setting in which it was written. King Belshazzar's blaspheme. When King Belshazzar, the son of King Nebuchadnezzar, had a feast, they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Dan 5:3-4. But it was an abomination to God having a pagan, idolatrous nation use the vessels that were set apart for holy use in the duties of the temple. Even the king's concubines drank from them, and God responded by sending the king a very bad message that would spell the end for King Belshazzar. The handwriting on the wall just after King Belshazzar desecrated the vessels of the temple, something strange happened. Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Dan 5:5. That's when the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him, his limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. Dan 5:6. So after he summoned the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers, including all the wise men of Babylon, but they said they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Dan 5:8. At which King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. Dan 5:9. After the queen remembered Daniel interpreting King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, she recommended that Daniel to the king, and so Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you." Dan 5:13-14. The meaning given the fact that neither the king nor any of his wisest men could translate the handwriting, it must have been in a language unknown to them. Was it in Hebrew, which may be why Daniel knew exactly what was written? Some of the phrases sound very much like the Aramaic words, particularly in Daniel 5:26-31, which Daniel probably knew as well. Whatever the case, and it really doesn't matter, this is the writing that was inscribed, Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Dan 5:25-28. The handwriting was on the wall for King Belshazzar and Babylon. His time had come to an end. He and his kingdom had been weighed and found wanting. He had reached a point of no place for grace. Conclusion: if you have read the Bible or read many Christian articles that clearly proclaim the gospel, Acts 4:12, Rom 10:9-13, etc., and have closed your ears and covered your eyes to the truth, then you are distancing yourself further and further from God. He will resist you if you have too much pride, but will extend his grace if you humble yourself. James 4:6. Peter warns it would have been better for them never to have known the way of righteousness than after knowing it to turn back from the holy commandment delivered to them. 2 Pet 2:21, meaning that everyone is held more responsible for the more truth they hear and reject than those who didn't know as much about God's mercy, grace, and justice. Jesus puts it this way, That servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating, but the one who did not know, and did what deserved a beating, will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. Luke 12:47-48. Is the handwriting on the wall today? I am sure it is, because the unsaved world's been weighed and been found seriously wanting. In our existing world as we know it from our elected federal and provincial governments and through cities and towns elected political officials, we are seeing corruption and crimes escalating very rapidly. Prior to the existing pandemic, one might wonder how really our cities, towns, and roadways are safe. Severe weather conditions in the east, severe weather conditions in the west, and the violence that we hear in the news around the world are in a chaotic mode of self-destruction. It was predicted in the living word of the Bible, pestilence is a deadly disaster, usually a disease, that affects an entire community. Pestilence is contagious, virulent, and devastating. For example, the Black Plague in Europe, which killed over 30% of the population during the late Middle Ages, was a pestilence. In the Bible, pestilence is usually a sign of God's judgment on a nation or people group. Deuteronomy 32:24, 1 Chronicle 21:12, Ezekiel 7:14-15. The God who protects and blesses is also the God who sends disaster and pestilence when it accomplishes his righteous purposes on earth. Isaiah 45:7, Ezekiel 5:16-17, Amos 4:10. Pestilence is promised as part of God's final judgment on the world in Revelation 18:8. The word translated pestilence is often translated as plague or disaster in new versions of the English Bible. However, because the word is often paired with both of those, it may imply greater devastation than mere physical disease. Pestilence incorporates any and all forms of public and mass destruction and often accompanies famine, Ezekiel 7:15, or war, Jeremiah 21:9. Jesus forewarned of pestilence when he described the end times, Luke 21:11. After David's sinful census, the Lord brought judgment upon Israel in the form of pestilence. The Lord sent a pestilence on Israel from the morning until the appointed time. And there died of the people from Dan to Beersheba 70,000 men, 2 Samuel 24:15, ESV. God had also sent pestilence in the aftermath of Korah's rebellion, Numbers 16:49, and as a judgment for Israel's immorality at Baal-Peor, Numbers 25:9, but the epidemic recorded in 2 Samuel 24 was the most deadly ever to hit the Israelites. Then God had mercy and halted the judgment. When the angel stretched out his hand to destroy Jerusalem, the Lord relented concerning the disaster and said to the angel who was afflicting the people, "Enough. Withdraw your hand." Verse 16. Our sovereign God is Lord of any pestilence, Habakkuk 3:5. Knowing that God is in control, we do not need to fear, whatever happens, see Psalm 91:5-6. Believers are not immune from the effects of living in a fallen world, but we are assured that there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, Romans 8:1. God may test our faith through a time of pestilence, but Christians know such an ordeal is not God's judgment on them. See 1 Corinthians 11:32, James 1:3. 1 Peter 1 brings upon the unrighteous and rebellious is pestilence. Not every epidemic is the direct judgment of God, but the Bible indicates that some instances of pestilence in history have been a punishment for sin. God sent pestilence to punish the Israelites for their ongoing idolatry and disobedience, Deuteronomy 32:24, Jeremiah 42:22, and during the tribulation, he will send pestilence to punish the unrepentant. The first angel went and poured out his bowl on the land, and ugly, festering sores broke out on the people who had the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. Revelation 16:2, cf. Revelation 18:8, Matthew 24:7. Blessings, Living Testimonies Ministries Outreach, Evangelist Cuthbert.